At Quantico Marine Base, there's a janitor that every four-star general salutes. She has no military record, no documented past, and according to official files, she doesn't even exist. Yet when Betty Torres quietly pushes her cleaning cart through the Pentagon's most classified corridors, conversations stop, and the most powerful military leaders in America nod with a respect reserved for legends. Nobody knows where she came from. Nobody knows her real story. But every general remembers her name. This is the mystery of the Silent Guardian. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune. Betty Torres guided her cleaning cart down the polished corridors of Building 2 at Quantico Marine Base. At 43 years old, she moved with a deliberate quietness that seemed almost supernatural, her footsteps barely audible on the waxed floors. Her presence so unassuming that most people looked right through her. She wore the standard-issue gray uniform of civilian maintenance staff, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail beneath a worn baseball cap that had seen better days. Everything about her appearance suggested ordinary, just another invisible worker keeping the massive military complex functioning behind the scenes. Yet something in her eyes betrayed a depth that contradicted her humble position, a watchfulness that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings with the precision of someone accustomed to situations where awareness meant survival. Betty had been cleaning these halls for 7 years now, arriving each morning at precisely 0500 hours and departing at 1700 hours with the same punctuality that governed every aspect of military life. Her supervisor, Frank Morrison, a retired Navy chief who managed the civilian maintenance crew, had long ago stopped trying to figure out what made her different from the other custodial staff. She never called in sick, never complained about assignments, and somehow managed to clean areas faster and more thoroughly than workers half her age. "Morning, Betty," Frank called out as she signed in at the maintenance office, a converted storage room that served as headquarters for the dozen civilians responsible for keeping Building 2A operational. "Got something unusual for you today." Betty looked up from the time clock, her expression unchanged but her attention fully focused. After 7 years, Frank had learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when Betty was truly listening versus when she was simply being polite. "Pentagon Liaison Office is hosting some kind of classified briefing today," Frank continued, pulling out a work order that carried more official stamps and signatures than typical cleaning assignments. "They specifically requested our most reliable person for security maintenance during the event. Figured that'd be you." The work order was unusual in several ways that Betty noticed immediately. First, it required security clearance verification, something that had never been necessary for routine cleaning duties. Second, it specified that the assigned worker must remain in the designated area throughout the entire event duration, rather than following the standard rotation schedule. Most significantly, it was signed by Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base's deputy commander for special operations, rather than the typical facilities management personnel who handled such requests. Betty accepted the work order without comment, but her mind was already processing the implications. The Pentagon Liaison Office was used exclusively for coordination between Quantico's training operations and high-level military leadership in Washington. Meetings held in that facility typically involved classified information that civilian maintenance workers weren't supposed to access, which made the specific request for extended security maintenance both unusual and potentially significant. She spent the morning completing her regular assignments with her characteristic efficiency, working through the standard rotation of offices, briefing rooms, and administrative areas that comprised Building 2A's daily maintenance requirements. But as she cleaned, Betty found herself unconsciously mapping the building's security protocols, noting the positions of cameras, identifying the locations of emergency exits, and observing the movement patterns of military personnel with the kind of automatic awareness that most people never developed. At 1100 hours, she reported to the Pentagon Liaison Office, a suite of rooms located in Building 2A's most secure section. The area required badge access and was monitored by security cameras that recorded everyone entering or leaving. As Betty approached the checkpoint, she noticed increased activity that suggested today's briefing involved personnel of considerable importance. 2. Military police officers were stationed at positions that weren't typically manned during routine meetings. The parking area outside showed vehicles bearing license plates indicating high-ranking officials, including several that suggested the presence of general-level officers. Most telling was the communications equipment being installed by technicians, wearing the specialized gear used for encrypted video conferencing with classified military installations. The desk sergeant at the security checkpoint, a young Marine corporal named David Chun, barely looked up as Betty presented her identification and work order. He'd seen her dozens of times over the past 7 years, and like most military personnel, he'd developed the habit of not really noticing civilian maintenance workers unless something went wrong. "You'll be working the main conference room and adjacent hallway areas," Corporal Chun explained, his tone carrying the kind of casual authority that came from dealing with routine administrative procedures. "Event starts at 1300 hours and runs until approximately 1600 hours. You're cleared to continue normal cleaning duties, but you'll need to remain in the designated area until the briefing concludes." Betty nodded her understanding and proceeded into the liaison office complex, pushing her cart toward the main conference room where the day's activities would take place. The space was larger than most briefing areas, equipped with sophisticated audio-visual equipment and a rectangular table capable of seating 20 people. The walls displayed maps of various global regions, and multiple screens showed rotating displays of classified information that was automatically censored when unauthorized personnel entered the room. As she began her work, Betty became aware of the gradual arrival of the briefing participants. Through peripheral observation, the kind of unobtrusive awareness that custodial workers develop to avoid interfering with important activities, she noted the arrival of officers whose rank insignia indicated positions of considerable authority within the military hierarchy. Colonel Patricia Hayes arrived first, followed by 2 brigadier generals whose name tags identified them as Williams and Rodriguez. Their conversation, conducted in the low tones that military officers used when discussing sensitive information, suggested they were preparing for discussions that extended beyond routine administrative coordination. At 1245 hours, a convoy of black SUVs arrived in the secure parking area, discharging additional personnel whose bearing and security escorts indicated even higher levels of authority. Betty continued her cleaning duties, maintaining the invisible presence that had characterized her work for 7 years, but she couldn't help noticing the arrival of individuals whose presence at Quantico suggested something far more significant than typical interagency coordination. The last vehicle to arrive carried a figure whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the liaison office complex. Even from her position in the conference room, Betty could sense the shift in energy that occurred when someone of exceptional authority entered a military facility. Conversations became more formal, postures straightened, and the casual efficiency that characterized normal operations transformed into the heightened alertness that accompanied visits from senior leadership. At precisely 1300 hours, the conference room filled with military personnel representing multiple branches of service and various levels of command authority. Betty retreated to the hallway areas, continuing her maintenance duties while remaining within the designated security perimeter as her work order required. Through the partially open conference room door, she could hear fragments of conversation that suggested today's briefing involved operational planning for classified missions of considerable complexity and importance. References to overseas assets, intelligence coordination, and operational security protocols indicated discussions that extended far beyond the training activities that typically occurred at Quantico. What made the situation particularly intriguing was the repeated mention of consultation with established resources and verified operational contacts, language that suggested the briefing participants were seeking information from sources outside their normal military intelligence channels. As Betty worked in the hallway, maintaining her characteristic invisibility while fulfilling her maintenance responsibilities, she couldn't shake the feeling that today's events were somehow connected to something larger than routine military planning. The combination of high-level participants, enhanced security protocols, and the unusual nature of her work assignment created an atmosphere of significance that extended beyond normal interagency coordination. But Betty Torres had learned long ago that asking questions about things that weren't her business was a luxury that people in her position couldn't afford. So she continued cleaning, maintaining the same professional invisibility that had characterized her work for 7 years, while filing away observations that might prove relevant to understanding the complex world that surrounded her. Daily routine. The briefing was scheduled to continue for another 3 hours, and Betty had the distinct feeling that today's events would prove more significant than anyone realized. Sometimes the most important information was hidden in plain sight, visible only to people who understood how to look without being seen. In the world of military intelligence and classified operations, Betty Torres had perfected the art of being invisible. What she hadn't expected was that today, her invisibility might become her greatest asset in understanding mysteries that extended far beyond routine maintenance duties at Quantico Marine Base. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign that something was wrong came at 13:47 hours, when the conference room's secure communication system began emitting the distinctive alert tone that indicated priority intelligence updates from overseas operations centers. Betty was replacing trash liners in the hallway when she heard Colonel Hayes' voice rise with sudden urgency. "That's impossible. Our last confirmed contact was 18 hours ago. There's no way we lost communication with all 3 forward observation posts simultaneously." Through her peripheral vision, Betty could see military personnel moving with the kind of controlled urgency that indicated a developing crisis. Laptops were opened, secure phones were activated, and the casual atmosphere of a routine briefing transformed into something far more serious. Brigadier General Williams emerged from the conference room, his expression grim as he spoke rapidly into an encrypted satellite phone. "I need immediate verification of asset status in sectors 7 through 12. Priority authentication, full spectrum confirmation." Betty continued her work, but her trained awareness cataloged every detail of the unfolding situation. After 7 years of invisible presence in military facilities, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to absorb information without appearing to pay attention. It was a skill that had kept her alive in situations far more dangerous than cleaning government buildings. The crisis escalated rapidly. Within 20 minutes, the conference room had transformed into an emergency command center, with additional personnel arriving via secure transport and communication links being established with multiple overseas locations. The maps on the walls were replaced with real-time satellite imagery, and the routine briefing materials disappeared in favor of operational status reports, marked with classification levels that indicated active mission coordination. "Ma'am." Corporal Chun approached Betty with obvious nervousness. "I need to ask you to restrict your cleaning activities to the immediate hallway area. The briefing has been elevated to operational status, and we need to maintain strict access control." Betty nodded her understanding, But she noticed that Chun's instructions didn't include removing her from the area entirely. In most military facilities, civilian personnel would be evacuated immediately when routine meetings escalated to operational status. The fact that she was being asked to remain, albeit with restricted movement, suggested something unusual about her security clearance or her role in the facility. As she worked within the limited area, Betty became increasingly aware of conversations that painted a troubling picture of overseas operations in crisis. References to missing assets, compromised communications, and unconfirmed casualties indicated that military personnel in classified locations were facing life-threatening situations without reliable support from command authorities. At 14:25 hours, a new figure entered the liaison office complex, and Betty immediately recognized the change in atmosphere that accompanied truly senior military leadership. The individual wore the uniform of a three-star general, but more significantly, carried themselves with the kind of authority that came from decades of operational command experience. Lieutenant General Sarah Mitchell moved through the facility with purpose that suggested she had been called in specifically to address the developing crisis. Her arrival triggered a flurry of activity as briefing materials were updated and communication protocols were adjusted to accommodate her command authority. "Status report," General Mitchell demanded as she entered the conference room, her voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that immediately focused everyone's attention. 3 forward observation posts in classified locations have gone silent, Colonel Hayes reported. Last confirmed communication was at 2,340 hours local time yesterday. All attempts at reestablishment have failed, including emergency backup. Protocols. Personnel status? General Mitchell asked. Unknown. We're dealing with 18 operatives whose safety cannot be confirmed through normal channels. Standard extraction protocols are compromised due to the communication blackout. Betty continued cleaning, but her mind was processing the implications of what she was hearing. Forward observation posts in classified locations typically involved intelligence gathering operations that required personnel to maintain low profiles in potentially hostile environments. The loss of communication with multiple posts simultaneously suggested either coordinated enemy action or catastrophic equipment failure that endangered American military personnel. General Mitchell's response revealed the severity of the situation. "We need alternative verification methods. Are there any unconventional resources available for independent status confirmation?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigarette. Betty could sense the tension in the room as military officers struggled with a crisis that exceeded their normal operational capabilities. Standard military protocols were designed for situations where communication infrastructure remained functional and command authority could be maintained through established channels. Colonel Hayes consulted her briefing materials before responding. "Ma'am, we have limited options for independent verification. Most alternative resources require extended deployment timelines that may not be feasible given the potential urgency of the situation." "What about local assets?" General Mitchell pressed. "Anyone with established credibility who could provide ground truth assessment without compromising operational security." The conversation continued for several minutes with various officers, proposing solutions that were systematically eliminated due to security concerns, logistical limitations, or time constraints. Betty found herself unconsciously analyzing the problem from perspectives that her colleagues couldn't access, considering options that weren't available through normal military channels. At 14:50 hours, the crisis deepened when additional intelligence updates confirmed that the communication blackout extended beyond the original 3 observation posts to include backup facilities and emergency coordination centers. What had initially appeared to be isolated equipment failure was beginning to look like coordinated enemy action designed to blind American intelligence operations in critical regions. Brigadier General Rodriguez entered the conference room carrying classified documents that further complicated the situation. We've received intelligence suggesting that our communication compromises may be connected to broader, hostile activities targeting American assets throughout the region. This isn't just equipment failure. General Mitchell's expression darkened as she processed the implications. Timeline for conventional response? Minimum 72 hours to deploy assets with appropriate security clearances and operational capabilities. Rodriguez replied. That assumes optimal conditions and no additional complications. Unacceptable. Our people may not have 72 hours. Betty continued her maintenance duties, but she could feel the weight of the crisis affecting everyone in the facility. Military personnel were dealing with the nightmare scenario that haunted every commander. Subordinates in danger with no reliable means of providing assistance or even confirming their status. The conversation turned to increasingly desperate alternatives. Emergency diplomatic channels were considered and rejected due to security concerns. Conventional military deployment was eliminated due to time constraints. Commercial intelligence resources were deemed insufficiently reliable for situations involving American military personnel. As the afternoon progressed, Betty noticed something that the military personnel seemed to have overlooked in their focus on conventional solutions. The crisis they were facing required exactly the kind of unconventional approach that official military channels couldn't provide. It needed someone who could operate outside normal protocols, who had access to resources that weren't documented in official databases, and who possessed the kind of operational experience that couldn't be learned through training programs. At 15:30 hours, General Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. We need to explore all available options, regardless of how unconventional they might seem. The safety of our personnel takes priority over standard operational procedures. Colonel Hayes consulted her notes before responding with obvious reluctance. Ma'am, there might be one possibility we haven't fully explored. It's not conventional, and it would require accessing resources that aren't typically available through normal channels. Explain. We have indications that there might be independent assets with relevant operational experience and established credibility in the affected regions. The challenge is that these resources operate outside official military structure and would require alternative verification procedures. General Mitchell's expression showed interest despite her obvious skepticism. What kind of alternative verification? Personal recognition by senior command personnel who have worked with these assets under classified circumstances. It's not documented through normal channels, but there are individuals whose operational history includes coordination with unconventional resources. The conversation was interrupted by another priority intelligence update that confirmed Betty's worst fears about the developing situation. American military personnel were in immediate danger, standard protocols were inadequate for providing assistance, and time was running out for finding solutions that could save lives. As military officers struggled with crisis management challenges that exceeded their training and experience, Betty Torres continued cleaning hallways with the same invisible efficiency that had characterized her work for 7 years. But beneath her unassuming exterior, she was processing information and analyzing options that would soon transform her from invisible custodial worker into something far more significant. The crisis at Quantico was about to reveal that sometimes the most important resources were hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. And sometimes the difference between success and disaster depended on recognizing that conventional wisdom wasn't always sufficient for unconventional problems. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. At 16:15 hours, just as General Mitchell was preparing to authorize emergency deployment protocols that would take days to implement, a young intelligence analyst named Lieutenant Marcus Thompson burst into the conference room with information that changed everything. Ma'am, we've received an encrypted communication through non-standard channels, Thompson announced, his voice carrying excitement mixed with confusion. Someone claiming to have direct knowledge of our missing assets has made contact through secure diplomatic protocols. General Mitchell's attention snapped to the lieutenant with laser focus. Explain. The communication came through the Swiss Embassy's classified liaison office in Zurich. The sender identified our missing personnel by name, location, and mission. Parameters that aren't available through any public channels. They're claiming to have real-time status information and offering immediate verification assistance. Betty's cleaning cloth paused for just a fraction of a second before resuming. Its motion across the hallway water fountain. 7 years of invisible observation had taught her to recognize the moment when ordinary situations transformed into something extraordinary. Colonel Hayes leaned forward with obvious skepticism. What kind of verification assistance? And how? Did an unauthorized source gain access to classified mission parameters? Lieutenant Thompson consulted his secure tablet before responding. The sender is requesting direct communication with someone designated as Verification Authority 77 Alpha, and claims that this individual will be able to authenticate their credibility through personal recognition rather than documented channels. The conference room fell silent as military personnel processed information that challenged their understanding of normal operational protocols. Verification Authority codes weren't random designations, they referred to specific individuals with documented clearance levels and established authentication procedures. 77 Alpha isn't an active designation, Brigadier General Rodriguez said after consulting his classified reference materials. That code was retired years ago after being associated with operations that were moved to special access programs. General Mitchell's expression showed recognition that she was trying to suppress. Lieutenant Thompson, did the sender provide any additional authentication details? Yes, ma'am. They referenced operational coordination from previous missions, including Desert Rose, Mountain Eagle, and Silent Thunder. They also specified that verification should be conducted through personal recognition rather than documented record. Review. Betty continued her work, but her breathing had changed in a way that suggested she was processing information that carried personal significance. The operation names Lieutenant Thompson had mentioned weren't random military exercises. They were classified missions that had required coordination with assets outside normal military command structure. General Mitchell stood slowly, her expression revealing internal struggle between standard security protocols and operational necessity. The operations referenced by this unknown contact, they were all classified special access programs that required unconventional resource coordination. Ma'am, Colonel Hayes said carefully, are you suggesting that whoever made this contact has knowledge of special access programs from multiple time periods? That would indicate someone with extraordinary security clearance and operational experience, or someone who participated in those operations directly, General Mitchell replied, her voice carrying implications that weren't being stated explicitly. The conversation was interrupted by another priority update from Lieutenant Thompson, who had been monitoring incoming communications throughout the discussion. Ma'am, we've received additional information from the same source. They're providing real-time status updates on our missing assets. General Mitchell moved to review the incoming intelligence, her expression shifting from skepticism to focused attention as she processed information that couldn't have been obtained through conventional sources. This is impossible, she said quietly. The sender is providing tactical details about our forward observation posts that only someone with direct access could know. Equipment status, personnel conditions, even environmental factors that affect operational capability. Betty had moved closer to the conference room, ostensibly to clean door frames but actually to observe the unfolding situation. Her position allowed her to see the classified displays showing incoming intelligence that was both remarkably detailed and disturbingly accurate. Colonel Hayes reviewed the information with obvious amazement. Ma'am, whoever this source is, they have access to information that suggests they're either part of our operations or they have surveillance capabilities that exceed our own intelligence-gathering methods. There's a third possibility, General Mitchell said, her voice carrying reluctance to voice what she was thinking. They might be someone who operates outside official military structure, maintains coordination with our operations through informal channels. The implications hung in the air like fog over a battlefield. Military personnel were trained to work within established command structures and documented protocols. The concept of critical operations being coordinated through unofficial channels challenged fundamental assumptions about how national security was maintained. Lieutenant Thompson provided another update that deepened the mystery. Ma'am, the source is now requesting immediate communication with Verification Authority 77 Alpha. They're claiming that time-sensitive information about our missing assets requires direct coordination rather than standard intelligence channels. Brigadier General Rodriguez consulted his reference materials again before making an observation that surprised everyone present. Ma'am, I've been reviewing historical records for Verification Authority 77 Alpha. The designation was assigned to an individual who coordinated with special access programs between 2019 and 2023, but their identity was classified at levels that exceed my current clearance. General Mitchell's expression revealed internal calculations that were invisible to most observers, but crystal clear to someone with Betty's training in reading human behavior under pressure. The operations referenced by this contact, Desert, Rose, Mountain Eagle, Silent Thunder, they all involved coordination with assets whose identity was protected through special classification procedures. Protected assets? Colonel Hayes asked. Individuals whose operational history required anonymity, even within classified military records. People whose continued effectiveness depended on maintaining separation from official documentation while providing critical support for special access programs. Betty had stopped pretending to clean and was now standing motionless in the hallway, her attention fully focused on conversation that was revealing information she had hoped would remain buried forever. 7 years of invisible existence at Quantico had been designed to maintain exactly the kind of anonymity that General Mitchell was describing. At 16:45 hours, the situation reached a critical decision point when Lieutenant Thompson received a final communication from their mysterious contact. Ma'am, the source is providing GPS coordinates for our missing assets and claiming they can facilitate immediate extraction if authorized through appropriate channels. But they're insisting on direct verification through 77 Alpha before proceeding. General Mitchell faced an impossible choice. 18 American military personnel were in danger with no reliable means of assistance through conventional channels. An unknown source was offering immediate help, but requiring authentication through procedures that weren't documented in official protocols. Colonel Hayes, General Mitchell said finally, I need you to research everything available about Verification Authority 77 Alpha. Whatever classified restrictions exist, this situation may justify accessing information that's normally protected. Ma'am, even if I can locate historical records about 77 Alpha, how do we find an individual whose identity was deliberately concealed? The whole point of protected asset classification is that these people can't be located through normal channels. General Mitchell was quiet for several minutes, processing options that all seemed to lead to dead ends or unacceptable risks. American military personnel needed immediate assistance, but accessing help through unofficial channels required trusting sources whose credibility couldn't be verified through standard procedures. The silence was broken by an observation from Brigadier General Rodriguez that changed everything. Ma'am, there's something unusual about this situation that we haven't fully considered. Explain. Our mysterious contact knew to reach us through Swiss diplomatic channels. They knew our missing personnel by name and mission parameters. They referenced specific classified operations from multiple time periods, and they're requesting verification through an individual whose designation suggests prior coordination with special access programs. General Mitchell nodded for him to continue. Ma'am, what if Verification Authority 77 Alpha isn't someone we need to find? What if there's someone who's already here? The observation hit the conference room like lightning hitting a tree. Betty Torres stood frozen in the hallway, understanding that 7 years of invisible existence were about to end in ways she couldn't control. Sometimes, the most important resources were hidden in plain sight. And sometimes crisis situations revealed truths that were more extraordinary than anyone imagined possible. The moment of truth arrived when General Mitchell walked out of the conference room and directly toward Betty Torres. It wasn't a casual emergence or coincidental timing. Mitchell moved with the deliberate purpose of someone who had just connected pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered across years of classified operations. Her expression carried the kind of recognition that came from suddenly understanding. Something that had been hidden in plain sight. Betty didn't run. She didn't attempt to maintain her cover or pretend confusion about why a 3-star general was approaching a civilian janitor with obvious intent. Instead, she straightened slightly, letting years of practiced invisibility fall away like a discarded uniform. "Ma'am," Betty said quietly, her voice carrying inflections that hadn't been audible during 7 years of minimal conversation with maintenance supervisors and security personnel. General Mitchell stopped 3 feet away, studying Betty's face with the intensity of someone confirming suspicions that challenged everything she thought she understood about personnel security and operational protocols. 7 years, Mitchell said, her voice barely above a whisper. 7 years of cleaning floors in classified facilities, and nobody thought to run enhanced background verification on the woman who has access to more sensitive information than most colonels. "With respect, ma'am," Betty replied, "enhanced background verification was conducted. The results were classified at levels that restricted access to personnel with need-to-know authorization. The response confirmed what Mitchell had suspected, but hadn't dared to believe. Betty Torres wasn't a civilian janitor who had somehow gained unauthorized access to classified military facilities. She was someone whose presence at Quantico had been deliberately arranged through channels that operated outside normal personnel. Management procedures. Behind them, military personnel were emerging from the conference room, drawn by the unprecedented sight of their commanding general conducting what appeared to be a formal military conversation with a member of the custodial staff. Colonel Hayes, Brigadier General Rodriguez, and Lieutenant Thompson formed a semicircle of confusion and curiosity. "Verification Authority 77 Alpha," Mitchell said, though her statement carried the inflection of a question seeking confirmation rather than a confident identification. Betty's response was barely audible but unmistakably clear to everyone. "Present. Authentication code Tango Mike 77 Charlie Alpha. Operational designation confirmed." The military personnel exchanged glances that conveyed shock, disbelief, and rapid mental recalculation of everything they thought they understood about security protocols and personnel management. Colonel Hayes stepped forward with obvious uncertainty about how to address a situation that exceeded her training and experience. "Ma'am," Hayes said to General Mitchell, "are you suggesting that our custodial staff includes someone with special access program clearance?" "I'm suggesting that our custodial staff includes someone whose operational history required protection through classification levels that exceed most officers' security clearance," Mitchell replied. "Someone whose continued effectiveness depended on maintaining anonymity even within military facilities." Betty glanced around the group of military personnel before making a decision that would transform her from invisible maintenance worker into something far more significant. "Ma'am, if I may suggest, this conversation should continue in a more secure environment." The hallway isn't appropriate for discussing matters that affect operational security. The statement was delivered with quiet authority that immediately changed the dynamics between Betty and the military personnel. Her suggestion wasn't a request from subordinate civilian staff. It was a professional recommendation from someone with operational experience in managing classified information under challenging circumstances. General Mitchell nodded her agreement. Conference room, secure communication protocols. As they moved into the briefing area, Betty's transformation became more apparent. Her posture shifted from the deliberately unobtrusive bearing of custodial staff to something that suggested confidence in high-pressure situations. Her movements carried economy and precision that spoke of training in environments where efficiency could mean the difference between success and disaster. Lieutenant Thompson was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, I'm having difficulty processing what appears to be happening here. Are we to understand that someone with Special Access Program clearance has been working as maintenance staff for 7 years?" "Not working as maintenance staff," Mitchell corrected. "Maintaining operational cover while providing security oversight for classified facilities. There's a significant difference." Betty accepted the clarification without comment, but her expression suggested appreciation for accurate description of her role rather than assumptions based on surface appearances. She settled into a chair at the conference table with movements that indicated familiarity with formal briefing environments. "The encrypted communications we've been receiving," General Mitchell continued, addressing Betty directly, "are they from sources you can verify through personal recognition?" "Yes, ma'am. The individual making contact is someone I coordinated with during Operation Silent Thunder in 2022. Their access to real-time information about our missing assets is consistent with their established operational capabilities." Colonel Hayes consulted her notes with obvious confusion. Operation Silent Thunder involved coordination with assets outside normal military command structure. "Are you indicating that you were part of that coordination?" "I was the primary liaison for unconventional resource integration during Silent Thunder," Betty replied matter-of-factly. "My role required maintaining separation from official documentation while providing critical support for special access programs. The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. Military personnel were processing information that challenged fundamental assumptions about how classified operations were coordinated, and who had access to information that they had assumed was restricted to documented command structures. Brigadier General Rodriguez leaned forward with questions that reflected both professional curiosity and security concerns. "Miss Torres, your presence at Quantico for 7 years, was that assignment related to ongoing operational requirements?" "Quantico serves as coordination hub for multiple special access programs," Betty explained. "My assignment provided monitoring and liaison capabilities for operations that required coordination with unconventional resources. The custodial cover allowed access to information and personnel without creating documentation that could compromise operational security." Lieutenant Thompson was taking notes with obvious difficulty processing information that exceeded his training in standard military protocols. "Ma'am, are you suggesting that special access programs use civilian cover assignments to embed operational assets within military facilities?" General Mitchell answered before Betty could respond. "Lieutenant, there are aspects of national security that operate outside conventional military structure. Sometimes the most critical operations require coordination through channels that aren't documented in standard reference materials." Betty appreciated the explanation, but she recognized the need to focus on immediate crisis rather than policy discussions about unconventional operations. "Ma'am, our missing assets don't have time for extended briefings about operational methodology. The source who made contact is offering immediate extraction assistance, but they require verification through established authentication procedures. The Statement redirected attention to the life-threatening crisis that had initiated this unprecedented revelation. 18 American military personnel remained in danger, and conventional rescue operations were still days away from deployment. What kind of authentication procedures? Colonel Hayes asked. Direct communication between verified assets using protocols that were established during previous joint operations, Betty replied. The source needs confirmation that I'm still operational and authorized to coordinate unconventional resource integration. General Mitchell made the decision that would save lives and transform Betty Torres from invisible custodial worker into officially recognized operational asset. Lieutenant Thompson established secure communication with our mystery contact. Verification Authority 77 Alpha is confirmed operational and authorized for immediate coordination. As Lieutenant Thompson began implementing communication protocols that would connect Betty with resources outside normal military channels, the assembled military personnel found themselves witnessing something extraordinary: the emergence of capabilities that had been hidden in plain sight for 7 years. Betty Torres wasn't just a janitor who had gained unauthorized access to classified information. She was a critical component of national security operations that most military personnel never knew existed. And today, her invisible presence at Quantico would prove to be the difference between 18 American casualties and a successful rescue operation. The Silent Guardian was about to become visible, and her emergence would reveal that sometimes the most important military assets were the ones that nobody knew existed. The secure communication link crackled to life at 17:05 hours, connecting Betty Torres with a voice that transported her instantly back to operations that existed only in classified memory. Nightingale, this is Crossroads. Authentication November 7 Tango Whiskey. Requesting immediate status verification for Silent Guardian protocols. Betty's response came without hesitation, delivered in the precise cadence that belonged to a world most of the assembled military personnel had never seen. Crossroads, this is Silent Guardian. Authentication confirmed Delta 9 Charlie Romeo. Operational status active, authorization level unchanged. The voice on the other end carried obvious relief mixed with professional urgency. Guardian, we have 18 packages in compromised positions across 3 grid squares. Standard extraction impossible due to communication blackout and hostile monitoring. Require immediate, unconventional coordination. General Mitchell and her staff listened with fascination as Betty shifted into operational mode that revealed capabilities hidden beneath 7 years of custodial invisibility. Her voice carried authority and tactical precision that spoke of experience in crisis management under the most challenging circumstances. Crossroads, current threat assessment for extraction zones? Betty asked while simultaneously accessing mapping displays that she operated with obvious familiarity. Multiple hostile patrols in all sectors. Electronic surveillance compromised our standard protocols. Weather window closes in 6 hours due to incoming storm system. Conventional backup requires minimum 48 hours deployment. Betty's fingers moved across classified terminals with practiced efficiency, accessing databases that required security clearances most colonels didn't possess. Real-time satellite imagery appeared on multiple screens, showing terrain that was obviously hostile and challenging. Colonel Hayes watched in amazement as Betty coordinated information that was beyond the scope of normal military intelligence channels. How was she accessing surveillance data that wasn't available through our standard protocols? Lieutenant Thompson monitored the communication while taking notes that would later require classification review. Ma'am, she's pulling information from sources that aren't listed in our reference databases. These appear to be independent intelligence assets operating outside normal military structure. Betty continued her coordination with methodical precision that revealed operational experience in exactly this type of crisis management. Crossroads, Guardian requests confirmation of alternate extraction resources. Do we have access to Mountain? Protocols established during Eagle operations? Affirmative, Guardian. Mountain assets remain operational with established credibility in affected regions. They're requesting immediate authorization for emergency extraction using unconventional methods. Brigadier General Rodriguez leaned toward General Mitchell, with obvious confusion about procedures that exceeded his understanding of military operations. Ma'am, what are Mountain protocols and how do they differ from standard extraction procedures? General Mitchell's expression suggested recognition of information she wasn't authorized to discuss in detail. General Rodriguez, some special access programs involve coordination with resources that operate independently of military command structure. These relationships were established through diplomatic and intelligence channels that require protection through specialized classification. Betty's coordination continued with increasing urgency as time constraints became more critical. Crossroads, Guardian requires tactical assessment for Route Bravo extraction through valley approaches. What's the current status of indigenous cooperation protocols? Guardian, indigenous assets confirm willingness to provide extraction assistance through established relationships. They're requesting authentication of your operational authority before proceeding with high-risk coordination. The conversation revealed layers of operational complexity that most military personnel never encountered. Betty was coordinating with multiple independent resources across international boundaries, managing relationships that had been developed through years of classified operations, and authorizing activities that would save American lives through methods that weren't documented in standard military procedures. Authentication confirmed, Betty responded. Guardian authorizes immediate extraction coordination through all available unconventional resources. Priority protection for packages, secondary consideration for operational security. General Mitchell interrupted the communication to address concerns that were developing among her staff. Ms. Torres, the resources you're coordinating with, are they accountable to American military authority? Betty looked up from her communication equipment with an expression that suggested appreciation for the question and understanding of the security implications. Ma'am, the resources are independent operators with established credibility and proven loyalty to American interests. They operate outside military command structure, but maintain coordination through intelligence channels that ensure accountability. Asterisk, essentially, General Mitchell explained to her staff, we're talking about assets who work with us, but not for us. People whose effectiveness depends on maintaining independence from official military structure, while providing critical support when conventional methods are inadequate. Colonel Hayes processed this information with obvious difficulty understanding operations that challenged standard military doctrine. Ma'am, how do we verify the reliability of resources that operate outside our command authority? Through personal relationships and operational history, Betty replied. The individuals I'm coordinating with have provided critical support during multiple classified operations over several years. Their credibility is established through performance rather than documentation. The secure communication resumed with updated information that demonstrated the effectiveness of unconventional coordination. Guardian, Mountain Assets Report successful. Contact with packages in Sectors 9 and 11. Extraction coordination proceeding according to emergency protocols. Estimated timeline 4 hours for complete operation. Betty's coordination reached critical decision points that would determine the success or failure of the rescue operation. Crossroads, Guardian authorizes full operational implementation. Confirm weather window sufficient for completion before storm arrival. Affirmative, Guardian. Weather assessment shows adequate window with 30-minute safety margin. All assets confirmed ready for immediate execution. Lieutenant Thompson monitored incoming intelligence updates that showed dramatic improvement in the situation affecting American military personnel. Ma'am, we're receiving real-time status reports indicating successful contact with our missing assets. Whatever coordination Ms. Torres is implementing appears to be working. General Mitchell observed Betty's operational management with growing recognition of capabilities that exceeded anything she had encountered in conventional military service. Ms. Torres, your coordination with these unconventional resources. How long have you been maintaining these relationships? Approximately 8 years, ma'am, Betty replied while continuing to monitor multiple communication channels. The relationships were established during overseas assignments that required integration with local assets for operations that couldn't be conducted through standard military channels. Brigadier General Rodriguez asked the question that everyone was thinking but hadn't voiced. Ms. Torres, your background before arriving at Quantico, was it entirely military service? Betty's pause suggested she was considering how much information to reveal about operations that remained classified, at levels that restricted discussion, even in secure facilities. General Rodriguez, my background includes military service, intelligence operations, and coordination with diplomatic assets in regions where American interests required protection through unconventional methods. The response was diplomatically phrased but clearly indicated experience that extended far beyond normal military career progression. Betty Torres hadn't just been a soldier or intelligence analyst. She had been someone whose operational history required the kind of anonymity that could only be maintained through special classification procedures. At 1747 hours, the breakthrough everyone had been hoping for arrived through Betty's coordination channels. Guardian, this is Crossroads. Mission successful. All 18 packages extracted safely and proceeding to secure locations. Operation complete with 0 casualties. The conference room erupted in controlled celebration as military personnel processed the successful rescue of American assets who had been presumed lost. Betty's coordination with unconventional resources had accomplished in 4 hours what conventional military operations would have required days to attempt. General Mitchell addressed Betty with obvious respect and gratitude. Ms. Torres, your coordination just saved 18 American lives through methods that our standard protocols couldn't have provided. The military owes you significant recognition for operational excellence under impossible circumstances. Betty's response reflected the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her 7 years of invisible service at Quantico. Ma'am, successful mission completion is its own recognition. The important thing is that our people are safe. But as military personnel began processing the implications of what they had witnessed, everyone understood that Betty Torres was far more than a custodial worker who had accidentally gained access to classified operations. She was a critical component of national security operations that most people never knew existed. Someone whose invisible presence provided capabilities that conventional military structure couldn't duplicate. The Silent Guardian had revealed herself not through dramatic gestures or military ceremony, but through quiet competence in crisis management that saved American lives when conventional methods failed. The aftermath of the successful rescue operation brought unexpected consequences that would transform Betty's carefully maintained anonymity into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Within 2 hours of mission completion, secure communications began flooding into Quantico from military installations across multiple continents. Word of the successful extraction had reached command levels that operated above normal military hierarchy, and the attention was creating complications that Betty had spent 7 years avoiding. Ms. Torres, General Mitchell said as encrypted messages continued arriving on classified terminals. It appears that your operational success has generated interest from sources that extend beyond normal military coordination channels. Betty reviewed the incoming communications with growing concern. Messages were arriving from Pentagon leadership, CIA coordination offices, State Department security divisions, and international intelligence agencies that shouldn't have known. About operational details from classified special access programs. Ma'am, Betty replied carefully, successful special access operations are supposed to remain compartmentalized within established security protocols. This level of communication suggests information security compromises that could affect future operational capability. Lieutenant Thompson was monitoring the communication traffic with obvious amazement at the volume and variety of sources requesting information about the rescue operation. Ma'am, we're receiving priority requests from 12 different agencies asking for operational briefings and personnel identification. Several are marked with classification levels I've never seen before. Colonel Hayes consulted her reference. Materials with increasing confusion about protocols that exceeded her security clearance and operational experience. General Mitchell, how do we respond to requests for information about operations that aren't documented through normal military channels? The question highlighted the fundamental challenge of Betty's situation. Her operational effectiveness depended on maintaining separation from official documentation and avoiding the kind of institutional attention that could compromise her ability to coordinate with unconventional resources. General Mitchell faced decisions that would affect not just Betty's future assignments, but the entire structure of special access programs that relied on anonymity and compartmentalized security. Ms. Torres, your professional recommendation regarding information sharing with agencies requesting operational details? Betty's response reflected years of experience managing the delicate balance between operational effectiveness and security requirements. Ma'am, my operational history suggests that institutional attention typically leads to bureaucratic oversight that compromises the flexibility required for unconventional coordination. The resources I work with value anonymity and informal cooperation above official recognition. Brigadier General Rodriguez raised concerns that were shared by multiple military personnel processing the implications of Betty's revelation. Ms. Torres, if your operational capabilities are this significant, shouldn't they be integrated into official military structure rather than operating through informal channels? With respect, sir, Betty replied, formal integration would eliminate exactly the characteristics that make unconventional coordination effective. Official military structure requires documentation, accountability procedures, and command authority relationships that would prevent the kind of independent cooperation that saved 18 American lives today. The conversation was interrupted by a priority communication from an unexpected source that would escalate the situation beyond anything anyone had anticipated. Lieutenant Thompson received an encrypted message marked with classification levels that required immediate attention from the highest available military authority. Ma'am, Thompson announced with obvious nervousness, we're receiving a communication from the Joint Chiefs of Staff requesting immediate secure video conference regarding today's operational activities. The message indicates that multiple cabinet-level officials are requesting briefings about special access coordination procedures. General Mitchell's expression showed recognition that Betty's exposure had created consequences that extended far beyond local military operations into national policy levels that would require careful management. Ms. Torres, are you prepared for the kind of institutional attention that comes with cabinet-level interest in your operational activities? Betty's response revealed concerns that went beyond personal career considerations to fundamental questions about national security, operations that most military personnel never encountered. Ma'am, cabinet-level attention typically results in policy reviews that could eliminate the informal cooperation agreements that make unconventional coordination possible. The individuals I work with prefer to avoid government oversight that could compromise their independence. The secure video conference initiated at 1935 hours, connecting Quantico with senior military leadership in Washington, whose presence indicated that Betty's operational success had generated attention at the highest levels of national security. Coordination. The video conference included Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Admiral Rebecca Foster, whose opening statement immediately established the significance of the discussion. General Mitchell, we need immediate briefing regarding operational coordination that resulted in successful extraction of classified assets through non-standard procedures. General Mitchell provided summary information about the crisis situation and Betty's coordination with unconventional resources, but her briefing carefully avoided details that could compromise operational security for future missions. Admiral Foster's response revealed the scope of institutional interest that Betty's exposure had generated. General Mitchell, we're receiving reports that this operation involved coordination with international assets whose activities haven't been documented through normal intelligence channels. We need comprehensive assessment of these relationships and their implications for national security policy. Betty requested permission to address the Joint Chiefs directly, understanding that her explanation would influence policy decisions affecting not just her own future, but the entire structure of special access programs that operated outside normal military documentation. Admiral Foster, Betty began, the resources that provided extraction assistance today represent relationships that were developed over multiple years through diplomatic and intelligence channels that required protection. Through specialized classification, these individuals and organizations provide critical support precisely because they operate independently of formal government oversight. Admiral Foster's questions revealed concerns that extended beyond operational details to fundamental policy. Issues about accountability and oversight for activities that affected American national security. Ms. Torres, how do we ensure accountability for operations that involve resources outside American military command structure? Ma'am, Betty replied, accountability is maintained through performance and results rather than documentation and oversight. The individuals I coordinate with have provided reliable support for American interests over multiple years because they trust that their independence will be respected. The video conference continued for nearly an hour, with cabinet-level officials asking questions that revealed growing institutional pressure to formalize relationships that had been deliberately kept informal to maintain their effectiveness. Secretary of Defense Martin Crawford participated through secure connection, asking questions that highlighted the tension between institutional oversight and operational effectiveness. Ms. Torres, your operational capabilities clearly provide significant value for national security operations. How do we balance the need for oversight with the requirements for informal coordination? Betty's response addressed the fundamental challenge that her exposure had created. Mr. Secretary, formal oversight typically eliminates the trust relationships that make unconventional coordination possible. The resources I work with cooperate because they know their independence won't be compromised by government bureaucracy. As the video conference concluded, Admiral Foster made announcements that would transform Betty's carefully maintained anonymity into something far more complex and potentially problematic. Ms. Torres, your operational capabilities require formal recognition and integration into national security planning. We'll be establishing new protocols for special access coordination that acknowledge your unique position while ensuring appropriate oversight. Betty understood that her 7 years of invisible service at Quantico were ending in ways that could compromise everything she had worked to maintain. Formal recognition meant documentation, oversight procedures, and institutional attention that could eliminate her ability to coordinate with the independent resources that made her operationally effective. After the video conference ended, General Mitchell addressed concerns that everyone was thinking but hadn't voiced. Ms. Torres, the attention you've received today will likely result in significant changes to your operational status. Are you prepared for institutional recognition that could affect your ability to maintain the informal relationships that make your coordination effective? Betty's response reflected understanding that successful operations sometimes created problems that were more complex than the original challenges they were designed to solve. Ma'am, institutional attention has historically led to bureaucratic oversight that eliminates exactly the characteristics that make special access coordination effective. Today's success may have compromised my ability to provide similar support in the future. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Betty Torres had saved 18 American lives through exceptional operational coordination, but her success had generated institutional attention that could prevent her from providing similar capabilities when future crises required unconventional solutions. The silent guardian had become visible, but visibility brought consequences that threatened everything she had worked to maintain through 7 years of anonymous service to national security operations that most people never knew existed. The solution came from an unexpected source and would require sacrifices that Betty Torres had never anticipated making. 3 days after the successful rescue operation, as institutional pressure continued building for formal integration of Betty's capabilities into official military structure, a private meeting was arranged between Betty and someone whose authority exceeded normal military hierarchy. The meeting took place in a secure facility outside Washington, in a conference room that carried no identifying markers or official designations. Betty arrived alone, having been instructed to tell no one about the appointment or its purpose. The individual waiting for her was Director Sarah Chun of the National Security Council, whose presence indicated that Betty's situation had reached levels of government attention that operated above normal military coordination channels. Ms. Torres, Director Chun began without preamble, your recent operational success has created a policy crisis that affects national security coordination at the highest levels. We need to discuss options that will protect both your operational capabilities and the informal relationships that make your coordination effective. Betty appreciated the direct approach and the recognition that her situation involved complex considerations beyond normal personnel management issues. Ma'am, my primary concern is maintaining the trust relationships that enable unconventional coordination. Formal integration typically eliminates exactly the characteristics that make these relationships operationally valuable. Director Chun consulted classified briefing materials that clearly contained information about Betty's operational history extending far beyond the recent rescue mission. Ms. Torres, our assessment indicates that your coordination capabilities represent strategic national security assets that can't be adequately protected through normal military personnel procedures. The statement carried implications that suggested Betty's background involved classified operations at levels that exceeded what had been revealed during the crisis at Quantico. Director Chun, Betty said carefully, my operational effectiveness depends on maintaining separation from institutional oversight that could compromise the independence valued by the resources I coordinate with. How do we balance national security interests with the requirements for informal cooperation? Director Chun's response revealed policy considerations that extended beyond Betty's individual situation to broader questions about how America maintained relationships with unconventional allies whose cooperation couldn't be documented through normal diplomatic channels. Ms. Torres, we're proposing something unprecedented in modern national security operations. A formal recognition of your status that provides institutional protection while maintaining the anonymity required for your coordination activities. Betty listened with growing interest as Director Chun outlined a solution that addressed her concerns while acknowledging the legitimate government need for accountability in operations that affected American national security interests. The proposal involves establishing a new classification category specifically designed for assets whose operational effectiveness requires protection from normal oversight procedures. You would receive formal recognition of your contributions while maintaining the operational anonymity that enables your coordination with independent resources. The concept was innovative, but carried risks that Betty understood better than most government officials. Ma'am, formal classification categories typically require documentation and reporting procedures that could compromise operational security. How would this new category avoid the bureaucratic oversight that eliminates informal cooperation? Asterisk Director Chun's explanation revealed months of policy development work that had been conducted specifically to address the challenges posed by Betty's unique operational situation. The new classification would acknowledge your contributions through limited recognition channels while protecting your operational methods from institutional review. Your coordination activities would remain compartmentalized within special access programs, but your overall contributions would receive appropriate recognition at levels that don't compromise your working relationships. Betty processed this information while considering implications that extended beyond her personal situation to broader questions about how America maintained capabilities that couldn't be documented through normal military or intelligence channels. Director Chun, this new classification category, would it affect other assets who operate through similar informal coordination methods? That's one of the reasons we're having this conversation privately, Director Chun replied. Your situation has highlighted the need for institutional frameworks that can protect unconventional capabilities without compromising their effectiveness. This policy development could benefit multiple assets whose contributions aren't adequately recognized through current procedures. The conversation was interrupted by a secure communication that brought unexpected information about the broader implications of Betty's recent operational exposure. Ms. Torres, Director Chun said after reviewing the incoming message, "We've received information that your recent rescue coordination has generated interest from international intelligence agencies that are attempting to identify your background and operational methods. Your exposure has created security concerns that extend beyond American policy considerations." Betty understood immediately that her 7 years of anonymity out of Quantico had been compromised in ways that could affect not just her own operational security but the safety of the independent resources she coordinated with. "Ma'am," Betty replied, "international attention typically leads to surveillance and intelligence gathering efforts that could compromise the individuals who provided extraction assistance. Their safety depends on maintaining separation from government oversight that could identify their operational methods." Director Chun's expression showed recognition that Betty's concerns were based on operational experience in managing exactly these types of security challenges. "Ms. Torres, that's why we're proposing immediate implementation of the new classification category. Formal recognition through protected channels would provide security coverage for both your activities and the resources you coordinate with." Betty spent several minutes considering options that all involved trade-offs between operational effectiveness and institutional protection. Her coordination capabilities had proven their value through successful rescue operations, but maintaining those capabilities required balancing competing priorities that most government officials never encountered. "Director Chun," Betty said finally, "my acceptance of formal recognition through this new classification category, what would be the specific requirements and limitations?" Director Chun outlined a framework that had been developed through coordination between multiple agencies whose interests were affected by Betty's unique operational situation. You would receive appropriate recognition for your contributions, while maintaining operational autonomy for your coordination activities. Your methods would remain protected through special access classification, but your overall value would be acknowledged at levels that ensure institutional support for your continued effectiveness. The proposal represented innovative policy development that addressed concerns Betty had developed over years of managing the tension between operational effectiveness and institutional oversight. "Ma'am," Betty replied, My acceptance would depend on guarantees that the individuals and organizations I coordinate with would receive similar protection from institutional review that could compromise their independence. Director Chun's response indicated that Betty's concerns had been anticipated and addressed through policy development that considered the broader implications of formal recognition for unconventional coordination activities. Ms. Torres, the new classification includes provisions for protecting cooperative relationships with independent resources, whose effectiveness depends on maintaining separation from government oversight. Your coordination network would receive institutional protection without formal integration that could compromise their operational autonomy. Betty made the decision that would transform her from invisible custodial worker into formally recognized national security asset, while maintaining the operational anonymity that enabled her coordination with unconventional resources. Director Chun, I accept formal recognition through the new classification category, with the understanding that my operational methods and coordination relationships will remain protected through special access procedures that prevent institutional review. The agreement represented unprecedented policy innovation that acknowledged the value of capabilities that operated outside normal military and intelligence structures while providing institutional protection for assets whose contributions couldn't be adequately recognized through conventional procedures. As Betty left the secure facility, she understood that her 7 years of invisible service had ended, but her operational capabilities would continue through formal recognition that protected rather than compromised her ability to coordinate with the independent resources that made unconventional operations possible. The silent guardian would remain anonymous to most of the world, but her contributions would finally receive the institutional recognition that acknowledged her critical role in national security operations that most people never knew existed. 6 months later, the transformation was complete, yet in many ways, nothing had changed at all. Betty Torres still arrived at Building 2A at precisely 0500 hours each morning, still guided her cleaning cart through the polished corridors of Quantico Marine Base, and still maintained the same professional invisibility that had characterized her presence for over 7 years. To casual observers, she remained exactly what she had always appeared to be, a reliable custodial worker who kept classified facilities operational behind the scenes. But beneath this carefully maintained surface, everything was different. The new classification category that Director Chun had proposed, designated as Special Access Asset, Protected Operations, had been quietly implemented through channels that operated above normal military bureaucracy. Betty now possessed formal recognition that acknowledged her critical contributions to national security while maintaining the operational anonymity that enabled her coordination with unconventional resources. The changes were subtle but significant. Her security clearance had been updated to levels that reflected her actual operational history rather than her custodial cover assignment. Her personnel file had been transferred to special access programs that restricted review to individuals with specific need-to-know authorization. Most importantly, institutional protections had been established for the independent resources she coordinated with, ensuring that their cooperation wouldn't be compromised by government oversight that could eliminate their effectiveness. On this particular morning, as Betty completed her routine maintenance assignments, she received a discreet communication that would demonstrate how the new classification system functioned in practice. The message arrived through secure channels that appeared to be routine administrative updates, but actually contained operational coordination requests from sources that continued to operate outside normal military structure. Today's communication involved a developing situation in Southeast Asia where American diplomatic personnel required extraction assistance that couldn't be provided through conventional military channels. Betty reviewed the incoming intelligence while maintaining her custodial routine, processing tactical information with the same professional competence that had characterized her coordination during the Quantico crisis 6 months earlier. The situation involved complex political considerations that required exactly the kind of informal cooperation that formal military operations couldn't duplicate. Within 30 minutes, she had established secure communication with the same network of unconventional resources that had provided extraction assistance during the rescue operation that had first revealed her true capabilities. But now, instead of operating without institutional recognition, her coordination activities were conducted under formal classification that provided protection while maintaining operational flexibility. The difference was immediately apparent. Government agencies that had previously been unaware of Betty's capabilities now provided indirect support for her coordination activities without attempting to exercise oversight that could compromise her working relationships. Intelligence updates were made available through channels that hadn't existed during her years of complete anonymity. Most significantly, the individuals and organizations she worked with understood that their cooperation was now protected through formal government recognition that respected their independence. The morning's crisis was resolved within 4 hours through coordination that demonstrated the effectiveness of the new policy framework. American diplomatic personnel were extracted safely through methods that avoided the political complications that would have resulted from conventional military intervention. The operation succeeded because informal cooperation could accomplish what formal diplomatic and military channels couldn't manage. As Betty completed the coordination and returned to her maintenance duties, she reflected on how the new classification system had transformed her operational capabilities without eliminating the characteristics that made her coordination effective. At 1200 hours, an unexpected visitor arrived at Building 2 that would provide the most significant validation of the policy innovations that had emerged from Betty's exposure 6 months earlier. General Patricia Morrison, the same 4-star general whose unexpected salute had validated Captain Betty Torres at Fort Harrison, entered the facility with the kind of quiet authority that immediately commanded attention from military personnel throughout the complex. But this time, General Morrison's visit had a different purpose. She walked directly to the maintenance office where Betty was completing her administrative paperwork, moving with obvious intentionality that suggested this meeting had been carefully planned. "Ms. Torres," General Morrison said, her voice carrying the same authority that had silenced the conference room at Fort Harrison, "I wanted to personally acknowledge the innovations that your situation has contributed to national security policy development." Betty looked up from her paperwork with the same professional composure that had characterized her demeanor throughout 7 years of invisible service and 6 months of institutional recognition. "Ma'am," Betty replied, "the most important innovation has been maintaining operational effectiveness while providing appropriate protection for the resources that make unconventional coordination possible." General Morrison nodded her appreciation for Betty's focus on operational considerations rather than personal recognition. "Ms. Torres, the classification category that was developed for your situation has been implemented for 12 additional assets whose contributions hadn't been adequately recognized through conventional procedures. Your exposure has resulted in policy frameworks that benefit multiple individuals whose operational capabilities extend beyond normal military structure." The information revealed that Betty's situation had catalyzed broader policy innovations that addressed systemic challenges in recognizing and protecting capabilities that operated outside conventional government frameworks. "Ma'am," Betty said, "the most satisfying aspect of the new classification is knowing that other assets can receive appropriate recognition while maintaining the operational anonymity that enables their coordination with independent resources." General Morrison's visit included information about the broader implications of the policy innovations that had emerged from Betty's unique situation. "Ms. Torres, Your operational coordination has been referenced in policy discussions at NATO headquarters, discussed in joint intelligence briefings with allied nations, and studied by academic institutions that research unconventional warfare methodologies. Your contributions are influencing how democratic governments balance institutional oversight with operational effectiveness. Betty appreciated the recognition, but her response reflected the same focus on practical considerations that had characterized her approach throughout her career in special access operations. Ma'am, the most important measure of success is whether the new policies enable effective coordination that protects American interests while respecting the independence valued by the resources we work with. General Morrison's final statement provided information that validated the effectiveness of the innovative approach that had been developed to address Betty's unique operational situation. Ms. Torres, over the past 6 months, operations coordinated through the new classification category have successfully resolved 14 crisis situations that couldn't have been managed through conventional military or diplomatic channels. The policy framework has proven its value through operational results that protect American interests while maintaining relationships with unconventional allies. As General Morrison departed, Betty understood that her transformation from invisible custodial worker to formally recognized national security asset represented more than individual career advancement. Her situation had catalyzed policy innovations that acknowledged the reality of modern national security operations that required capabilities beyond conventional military and diplomatic structures. That evening, as Betty returned to her apartment in nearby Fredericksburg, she reflected on the journey that had taken her from complete anonymity to institutional recognition while maintaining the operational characteristics that made her coordination effective. The apartment itself reflected the same careful balance between ordinary appearance and extraordinary capability that characterized every aspect of her professional life. To neighbors and casual observers, she remained Betty Torres, a quiet government worker who kept regular hours and maintained friendly but private relationships with her community. But the secure communication equipment concealed within ordinary furniture, the reference materials that appeared to be routine household items, and the personal security measures that were invisible to untrained observation, revealed the reality of someone whose ordinary life provided cover for extraordinary responsibilities. Betty's phone displayed a message from Director Chun containing operational updates that would require coordination activities tomorrow. 3 developing situations in different global regions needed assessment for potential American involvement through unconventional channels. Each situation required exactly the kind of informal cooperation that Betty's network of independent resources could provide. As she prepared for another day of invisible service that would now receive appropriate institutional recognition, Betty Torres understood that she had achieved something unprecedented in modern national security operations. She had maintained operational effectiveness while securing formal acknowledgement of contributions that most people would never know existed. The silent guardian was no longer completely invisible, but her most important work continued to take place in shadows that protected both American interests and the independence of allies whose cooperation couldn't be documented through conventional diplomatic channels. Sometimes the most significant victories were measured not by public recognition or military ceremonies, but by quiet effectiveness that enabled extraordinary capabilities to continue protecting ordinary people from threats they would never know existed. Betty Torres had become officially recognized as what she had always been, an essential component of national security operations that operated beyond the boundaries of conventional military and diplomatic structures. Her story proved that sometimes the most important military assets were hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary people doing ordinary jobs, while quietly making everything else possible through competence that spoke louder than rank insignia or official documentation. The cleaning cart would return tomorrow, pushed by hands that had coordinated operations across multiple continents. And America would be safer because some guardians choose to remain silent, protecting from shadows while ensuring that democracy's most critical work continued through channels that most citizens would never need to understand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us